Okay, thanks, Anne, and thanks, everyone. It's nice to be here virtually, and I really appreciate being invited in as part of the program. First of all, I should just say congratulations for the exhibition. I've been involved in exhibitions myself for most of my adult life, at least, and I know I have a good sense of what's involved and what it takes to have got as far as you have in putting the exhibition together. So I don't take any of that for granted, and I have total respect for what you've achieved, especially in the current context. I have sort of like three preliminary things to say, but I have, this is not sort of scripted, and I'm not even quite sure how these 3 points are going to land, but I just kind of wanted to kind of share really what's sort of in my head, and not as a sort of direct response to the exhibition as such, but to the kind of business perhaps of what it means to be doing an exhibition right now in general. And the first thing I would like to talk about is just a sort of an anecdote that that I was looking through kind of my hard drives, old hard drives yesterday, and I was looking for a project that I'd curated in 2006, which in some senses feels like a long time ago, and in other senses just feels like yesterday. But it was an exhibition that I curated. I was living in London at the time, and I went looking for images of that exhibition, and I could find one single image, right? And I was, in this current moment, I was just sort of, it really somehow felt quite sort of poignant that the visual record of this exhibition event that was very important to me at the time just was only substantiated in evidence by this one image. And I started thinking about that a little bit, especially in the context of the way that exhibitions are being platformed today, the way that exhibition images are circulating, the way that in your own case, you have both documented the exhibition, but also sort of shared it and sought to share it across all these different platforms. And I was thinking about like what has happened then, what separates that moment like 15 years ago where you would develop an exhibition, produce an exhibition, make it public, and walk away with one single image, and the moment we're in now where like exhibition imagery is in some senses ahead, within and beyond the kind of exhibition event itself. And I mean, I don't have any kind of clear answers to that, but it really somehow struck me just being faced with that single image of an exhibition that I curated 15 years ago. Some of that shift, I think, is probably technological, in the sense that, in that time period, things have gone from, an analog image representation technology to digital technology. That's one shift that's happened. And that's also a shift that's meant that we're all a little, through digital technology and the way that technology is disseminated onto phones and into cheap everyday domestic technologies, we're all a little bit more expert in the way that we can produce images now than perhaps we were 15 years ago. So that's one kind of technological shift that I think has taken place. And then the other technological shift is, of course, the media itself, the media infrastructure that exists, both in a traditional journalistic sense, the media platforms of magazines or art journals or blogs, but also social media, of course, which both produces, replicates, reproduces, recirculates, and to a certain extent even anticipates images. That is a shift that we've seen in 15 years. But ultimately, I felt there was something kind of something more significant at stake in sort of comparing these two moments, the moment of today and the moment of 15 years ago. And I sort of tried to put my finger on it like this. I was like, I felt that 15 years ago in making an exhibition or making a kind of an art event, there was something sort of socially self-sufficient about it, or there was like a historical potential that you had a sort of blind faith in, that would be enough to ultimately be the kind of document of that particular event. And we're only talking about a very small exhibition in a grassroots space. I mean, it wasn't an exhibition space that was connected to a big institution or anything like that. But there was still somehow a kind of faith or a sort of primacy in this, or a centrality in the exhibition as a kind of an event, as a moment of kind of collective consciousness, that all of the participants of the exhibition and the visitors to that exhibition would witness, and that would then disappear into the ether, but ultimately would be redeemed as a sort of like historical moment in one way or another. And I just feel that it's really interesting, I think, as we kind of get older, to kind of look back at the way that exhibitions work and exhibition materials work as a kind of historical process. And I think that's what I've just tried to sort of say there about the kind of traffic of images and the sort of the changed environment for the traffic of images around art exhibitions and artwork itself is crucial to think about right now, right? Because we are in an environment where exhibition images are the only way in which people can encounter exhibitions directly at the moment, if they're not able to, if people aren't able to travel, or if people are working at home. There are exhibition images are the way in which many artists seek to sort of reach or kind of bridge their audiences. Exhibitions images are also the way, increasingly, that magazines and kind of news media are, that they're the means and the currency by which they're able to make kind of any evaluation or any kind of read on the kind of cultural outputs that are happening at the moment. So I just feel like there's been an enormous like groundswell of change that has accelerated really, really rapidly over the past year. And I think you guys are kind of like bang in the middle of that right now, and some of the decisions, some of them may have been strategic, some of them may have been curatorial, some of them are evidently led by the artistic practice itself. Like they're in a really important moment now in terms of the traffic of artistic imagery, but also conversely the status of exhibition making, right? Because the question comes with all of this imagery that's circulating in and around exhibitions, before exhibitions, during exhibitions, and in the legacy of exhibitions. What status does the exhibition event have? What does it even really mean to organize and propose a selection of artwork in a room and invite people to attend to it? It seems right now a peculiar and strange thing to do, and I feel that is becoming stranger as we begin to sort of cycle through another lockdown situation, and as institutions, curators, artists begin to adapt to that environment. So in the course of the conversation, I would be, as well as getting an introduction in terms of your own work, I would also be interested in hearing you speak about the exhibition as a kind of process, but also in terms of what it means to your practice. What is the kind of presentational significance of the work that you are that you've put forward into that exhibition, and how do you think about it in terms of some of the things I've just mentioned, in terms of online audiences, in terms of the images that are circulating around that work? I think it would be really useful, I think, and very timely to have a kind of general conversation about that. So I might start to draw those questions out of you, if that's okay. The second preliminary, which is going to be considerably shorter than the first, and apologies that I kind of went on there. This is all about you, don't forget, not me. But the second preliminary is really just to say that exhibitions are often a very bad testimony to the kind of to artistic labours and curatorial labours that go into them. I am someone that I'm based in County Clare. I'm meeting you for the first time on the other side of a computer screen. I've seen the documentation and I've read the artistic statements that have supported the work, but I cannot pretend that I have a comprehensive sense of your work, nor do I pretend that the video documentation that has been provided, as good as that is, provides me with a real penetration into your practice. And I think that's something that, of course, I understand sort of deeply, and I think we should be kind of sympathetic with as we kind of introduce the work and begin to talk about it. The third thing to say, and finally, before we get going with Sarah, I think Sarah is up first, is just to say that, of course, this is about each of you talking and introducing your work, but I think it's also important to recognise that others can contribute to that conversation too. We, you know, and in my experience, artists aren't always the best people, in fact, to speak about their work. Their work often develops in a more kind of collegiate or collaborative or discursive space. So if there are people that would like to comment or make observations about the work or contribute to the conversation that's being had with that particular artist, then I would encourage that to happen. That's all my preliminaries. I hope we haven't taken up all the space already at this stage. And like Anne said, I mean, let's just keep this as kind of light-footed as we can. Sarah, I think you are going to present your work first.
Yeah, I'm up first. So I suppose, yeah, I'll just say hello to everybody and hi, Matt. So yeah, I'll introduce you to my work, but I suppose just in response to what you were saying, I think because we were the graduating cohort of 2020, we really had to consider, I think for a lot of people, they even changed their work given that they weren't going to have a live audience. Yeah. And I don't know, I'd be just thinking back even for myself a few years ago, when you're exhibiting work, you'd be kind of precious about the imagery because you don't want to take away from the experience that people might have had in the gallery space or exhibition space. But then maybe the more kind of people use social media, it kind of became, if you don't put the images out there, the audience will. So you were almost better to get ahead of them. Sometimes, that's not to say that, you know, anyway, I don't know, that was probably just something that I would contribute to that idea. And
do you think that has fundamentally changed your approach to practice, or is the concern that you've just talked about there, is that more to do with like professional strategy and communication? I mean, are they separable in that sense?
Probably professional strategy and the idea maybe of, you know, art being elitist, and do you not share your work on social media platforms, or do you just embrace it? With my own practice, yeah, I suppose you would change things based on whether, because sometimes I would make installations which would require you to experience it in real life. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you just talk about the work that you have in the exhibition?
I will indeed. I'll try and share my screen now. So I have 3 pieces of work in the exhibition. 2 very small paintings, which I'm not going to discuss in any great detail, to be honest. And then a larger installation called A Raised Moon, where I projected a video onto a fake lunar landscape, and then a photograph called Lunar Dwelling. So I just included this image. It might make a little bit more sense when I move on to the next image, but that's just one of the paintings as part of a series of 2. So I think, yeah, this is kind of my starting point. And I think hopefully this will give you some kind of comprehensive understanding of what I was up to. So this is a photograph from 1885 that appeared in a text called "The Moon Considered as a Planet, a World and a Satellite." So I think James Carpenter provided the text and James Nasmyth provided the photographic prints. So these were some of the first images that ever circulated of the moon. But obviously looking at the date, this is prior to when anybody actually ever went to the moon. So this image, so a lot of people, when they saw this image, they would have believed it to be a true photograph, but telescopic photography had not yet been invented. So James Nasmyth was looking at the moon through a telescope, and then in his studio, he made small miniature plaster models and photographed the models. So for me in my own practice, I suppose I do like this kind of, yeah, the role of photography as a document. I think you even mentioned that earlier, Matt, you know, kind of the notion of photography as evidence of something. So yeah, anyway, so when looking through a telescope, it was believed that the moon was mountainous and that it contained these very tall, kind of sharp or jagged mountains, because the shadows on the moon are very exaggerated. And then it was only when they actually landed on the moon, they realized, oh, there's no mountains, it's craters. So again, it's just this idea of the subjectivity of knowledge, and the fact that knowledge and information is constantly evolving, and what might be truth or fact in one generation is discredited in the next.
There also seems to be just like a relationship, obviously, between of dimensions. I mean, I mean, I should imagine these models were obviously just based on what was viewable through a telescope, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then they've been, just to sort of step through it, and then they've been just so I understand, what is the process that's led to this this image that's on the screen at the moment? What is the, is it just a maquette based on?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just James Nasmyth made it from plaster based on what he could see through a telescope, and then photographed his miniature model and then printed it.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I hope that's kind of the starting point. But you can always come back to me if I don't make any sense.
I mean, no. I mean, you make total sense. But I think it's kind of fascinating in a way, because when I was reading the statement, I kind of actually assumed that this was a work that had been based on, or had been somehow configured by, a kind of remote viewer. Thinking about kind of remote viewers, or thinking about that kind of new distance that exists between objects and people, and between people and people right now. You know, like we have to, in our own worlds, in the same way we're doing now, you have to kind of reproject from the kind of little flat rectangles that we're speaking to each other through. We have to reproject all of that into a kind of three-dimensional and social space. So I somehow felt that, like, I felt that the work was somehow like being conditioned by, you know, those bigger conditions of social distancing and of remote viewership at the moment. But is this an inquiry that has been much longer?
No, and I think that's kind of interesting, yeah, that your response, you can't help it. It's always going to be influenced by what's currently happening. And that's probably how this work will be read. But I suppose when I became interested in that image, it was kind of prior to us engaging so much on Zoom through the screen. But even, I suppose, but in my practice, I do like this. It's always kind of how we navigate or how we interpret the world through a lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And then the work that you had in the exhibition also included like am I right that the sculptural floor-based work?
Yeah, that's it here.
And again, I mean, just to sort of hammer the point home, of course, this is a work that now has to be viewed through the window of the NCAD gallery. So again, you've got this kind of like flattening of dimensions and flattening of like of embodied experience happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I suppose so. I've just kind of shared images here. So yeah, I think even when we were planning to install this exhibition, you know, the date was set for us for January, and at the time, you know, we thought that it might be open to the public, even if it was just for, you know, a limited amount of people. And then that obviously changed again as we went into a more strict lockdown. So I think the window then did become very important to us as a kind of a portal into the exhibition. So yeah, based on that image, I wanted to create this kind of fictitious lunar landscape, but based on the notion of the moon from a previous era. So what I projected onto it, so I just included these two views because these are views that can't be seen from outside. So this is the interior view. So I was projecting onto the surface.
And what is that text, Sarah?
So I have it here for you.
Okay.
So what I did was they are 25 what I call moon descriptions. So they're written just using just adjectives and verbs. So I kind of appropriated or used Borges' fictitious language from his book Ciarán. I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but you know, it's part of one of his kind of infamous short stories. Where they find an encyclopedia that belongs to an imaginary planet. And on this planet, the inhabitants speak a language void of nouns. So therefore, rather than perceiving their world as objects in space, they see it as a series of actions. So there's no objects, there's no nouns, therefore nothing can be possessed. Well, that's my idea. So I just wanted to erase the noun moon. So therefore it can't be owned or possessed. Mm-hmm. So I just started writing out these descriptions using adjectives, adverbs, and verbs. Yeah. So I suppose it was basically, yeah, was doing a lot of research into the moon. I kind of became fixated on it as just this kind of beautiful landscape that's caught up in like cinema and sci-fi, and you know that's often used. You can just discuss a lot of earthly concerns by using that as a site.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah.
Or just to ask then, I mean, like you started with a 19th century. Was it 19th century the original?
Yep.
And then Borges coming in at 1940, and then you're reproducing this work in 2021. I mean, what does that historical sort of layering allow you to do, or is that just you troving through history led by the kind of subject of the moon, or is that a different kind of process?
No, it's probably just research. Yeah, I don't know if I really have an explanation for it. Maybe it's just to highlight our changing perceptions. Like, I suppose the relevance to this in the 21st century is the current missions to mine the moon. Mm-hmm. And that I'd say under Trump's administration that he was actively encouraging that to happen. Yeah. So yeah, I suppose that's maybe what I was kind of questioning, this notion of like the colonization of the moon.
Yeah.
So that's that's another photographic print that I have as part of the exhibition. I created this in my studio as part of the MFA. So blacked out the space and transformed the space into this kind of lunar dwelling. So again, looking at images of the moon and the kind of realization that, you know, not many of us have been there. You know, the surface of the moon is only known first-hand experience by 12 white American men. So our sense of knowing it has come through cinema and images.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, another sort of interesting reference for me is actually not to do with the moon as subject, but to do with really the kind of the Earth, in the way that the moon itself allowed for the first time a view of the Earth as a totality, right?
Yeah.
And the way that has like encouraged or put forward or accelerated ideas of, you know, the Earth as a kind of system, as a sort of contained system. So yeah, I think that's slightly different from your approach here, but it's still somehow like very much sort of, yeah, very much crisscrosses, historically speaking. And what's the future of your inquiry here? I mean, where is this project going?
Well, Matt, where is it going? I don't know. I suppose I could continue to use the moon as a landscape, I think, for a very long time. Or maybe I have become quite interested in just language and the possessive nature of kind of language. So as of yet, I'm not 100% sure.
There was a really good project. I'm not going to sort of, I can't even remember the title of it, but it would be easy to find by Bick van der Pol, the Dutch collaborators. And they did a project that was about a piece of the moon that was reportedly gifted to, I think, the Dutch.
Oh, and they lost it. Well, no, it was a piece of, it wasn't moon rock at all. It was something.
That's right. It was a fake.
Yeah. So I do have another video piece that focuses on the gifting of moon rock to Ireland and the fact that we lost one of the pieces in a fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do think though, I mean, the moon as a subject, of course, I can totally, I'm totally sort of captured by that, and I can sort of feel your sort of energy and enthusiasm for it. But I also feel that there's a sort of key, like, I'm just thinking about like how practices develop and continue, and not that there's a sort of fork in the roads and a set of decisions that are ahead of you necessarily in this sense, but you know, I wonder to myself whether whether there's whether I would bet on your practice sort of plotting a kind of thematic line. So like interested in the moon, drawing out its different historical contingencies, that kind of stuff as a subject, or whether this kind of representational question that you talked about a little bit, the relationship between cinema, the photograph and the physical, those sets of relationships might just open up like entirely new doors to you, of course, and would allow, in that sense, the moon becomes less a kind of subject or a horizon line for the practice, but more something more like a vehicle for the practice to explore kind of other issues. But it's, I mean, thanks so much for like introducing the work, and I got a real good sense of it. Barry. How are you, Barry?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Nice to meet you. Hi, everyone else. Okay, so I think I'm just going to kind of like Sarah, show some installation shots from the space and talk about the work I have in the current show. So I think the first thing to talk about is the process of my practice, which is at the moment kind of the relationship between drawing and animation, and specifically a technique of animation developed in 1917 called a rotoscope, and kind of a quite particular technique that begins with with film footage, and is then each frame is kind of hand drawn. And in a way, I don't know, I think what drew me to it was how it kind of slows down time into individual frames. And then by putting the drawings back together again, you kind of reconnect or kind of reimagine the time or a moment. So in this work that's in the gallery at the moment, it takes the form of a music video by a musician called Miles Manley. And he had an album out last year, and I really like the work he does with video, with other directors, and particularly I like the way his music has a lot of repetition. And I think in my work, how I think about animation and the loop, it kind of drew me towards working with him and his music. And he sent me a song that I thought I could kind of work with as to kind of explore the rhythms in my drawing. So in the space, there's a video playing the full animated video on a loop, just over 3 minutes, and there's 100 selection of the entire amount. It's about a quarter of all the drawings. And I suppose one of the main elements, or how I think about my work, or what's important to my work, is the idea of the handmade, or how is it relevant today? Why is it important? Why do I feel like it's important to me when a lot of moving images, a lot of animation has become digitized, has become removed from material form? I become more interested in the handmade. And I think especially when we lost the studio in March and I was at home without access to what at the time I was working with a lot of models, people working with hand models, working with movement, using people's gestures. And I was suddenly kind of just at home and thinking about the material itself, the paper, the kind of the process of drawing. And these drawings are all on A4 printer paper, and the process is quite stage based. I mean, in preparation for this, I tried to kind of think about how the actual final moving image comes to be, and it starts with filming a piece of video and then isolating still frames, and then printing out all of the still frames through a laserjet printer, and then drawing on the back of the prints, and then scanning the images again, and then rearranging the back into moving images. So within that process, I think there's something happens to the movement or to the gesture, and it kind of humanizes what started out as digital footage, digital movement, becomes kind of little interruptions happen, and kind of strange kind of accidents of my own making, of my own hand, how I scanned it, how I drew it, what choices I made. And then in terms of the space and how to display it, the video kind of stands alone as an animation. But then this idea of displaying, using the wall, or thinking about how to display animation or how to display moving images, I think in this context, the way I presented them is kind of as the original drawings on the wall, and running from top to bottom. You can see that they kind of seem to be repeated images, the same image, but they're sequentially changing one by one, as they do in the animation. And there's something in that about getting across the scale involved in the act of drawing and the process of animation that kind of interests me, and it kind of something that I didn't intend on originally, but it kind of resembles a fabric or a tapestry, some kind of, if I'm in the space and I blur my eyes, it kind of looks like a weave, or something kind of reminded, I think at the time I was looking at a lot of Annie Alber's drawings and weave structures and the kind of the grid system. That's something kind of unintentional aspect originally, but I'm quite interested in that idea of breaking down the time of the animation into these stills. So then, as Sarah said, the idea of using the space on Thomas Street, that became kind of interesting then to see, because something that a lot of my work or work in animation will be viewed on a phone or on a laptop, something quite small, experientially quite small. Then in the context of the gallery, it becomes quite large on the wall. It's 3.5 meters high. So I like the idea of passers-by being able to experience that, even though there's nobody in the gallery. They can still see the work in a gallery context or on the wall.
I mean, I think, thanks, Barry. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm sort of trying to reckon with is like whether, like, what's the difference here? And this isn't a criticism, it's more just like an open question of, you know, like, do the drawings just really become a kind of how-to approach, like expose of the moving image work? In the first part of your presentation, that was my kind of cynicism. I was like, well, you know, there's lots of like video, you know, video work, lots of artwork that has very laborious, very complex, very technical process, but that's not necessary. There's no impetus necessary to like reveal all of that.
Yeah.
So I was trying to sort of think like, what's the difference here? And I'm kind of interested about what you've just said there about like the drawings becoming, you know, the scale in which they're presented, the way that they become a kind of tapestry, the way that the kind of figuration of the face that's in the video begins to become something else, especially when it's viewed at a distance. But do you think you could just like, I'm just trying to sort of kind of, yeah, it's a sort of an open inquiry really, or a set of questions there about the relationship between the two, the video and the drawings, and what sort of decisions did you make there about putting them together, or how they would be read differently?
Yeah, I think it's what comes up there is that I was trying to get away from the idea of presenting them in a linear context. So even though the way I have them arranged here is quite structural, I kind of like the idea of in the context of a viewer in a gallery, somebody being able to get very close to this arrangement and being able to take their eye around the space, across, up, down, diagonally, but then also you can read it in the correct sequential order. Yeah. So I think there's something about kind of dissecting time or movement in that way. That's what draws me to this. And I think even though, yeah, the description how to, I quite like that. I quite like seeing behind the curtain of a process, of a technique. So to me, that's quite important in the context of displaying this work with two strands, with the video element and the physical and the kind of material element. Mm-hmm. I think it's also just this thing about thinking about why the hand, the kind of the immutability of the hand, the resonance of the handmade now, and thinking about painters or artists like, say, David Hockney's work, where he's working on iPad, and this kind of even ecological questions around wastage and paper and these things about, you know, I was thinking about that when I was using hundreds of sheets of paper. Like, is this wasteful, or is there something important about the materiality of of paper, and the danger of this idea of libraries becoming online and kind of losing the material formats? So there's some kind of, I'm kind of holding on to that, the material object, the paper quality. I think that's quite important in the work.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the video obviously is the second half of this, and you were keen to present that.
Yeah. So
yeah.
the video contains quite a lot. It's kind of built around the idea of, I'll just turn the audio down for. There's a lot in the video of around the idea of looping, of kind of loops from this idea, the start point, the end point. I think that came from, even though I'm expressing it through drawing in a visual sense, I kind of arrived at that through music and C.L. Floyer and kind of sound art, and the idea of sampling sounds and looping, and how does that change what statements or what can be said about through looping, about time or about a moment.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of came from that idea of music, and then came into drawing, and then came back to music by working with a musician, and to kind of create something that's quite a kind of given format, the music video. I like the idea of working within that kind of given concept, or the tradition.
Yeah. And I assume what's the status of this video? Is it kind of circulating online? Is Miles using it?
So he's released it as part of the promotion of his most recent album.
Okay.
So that was another kind of element of it. I think that's an area in the future I really want to get involved. I'm really interested in how musicians represent their work visually, and how all elements of that world in terms of album artwork, promotional material, videos, short clips, and what Sarah was saying as well about how so much of how we see visual culture now is through social media. I think at first it took me a while to warm to that idea, but then, especially now when the gallery experience is kind of off the table in some ways, or has kind of essentially become online, I quite like the idea of thinking about my animation in the context of say formats like of YouTube, of Vimeo, of kind of video platforms, and people being able to see my work from their homes, kind of taking it out of the gallery.
Yeah. I mean, I would, my feeling is that like that, the animation seems quite sort of at home actually on a kind of digital platform, and where it could be distributed and shared quite widely. I think the challenge for me is like what that video in itself does within a gallery context. Like what extra does that like bring to the work? And I kind of get it, I think, in terms of the drawings and what that is as a physical, embodied, standing in front of it style experience. And your mention of the tapestry, the linearity, all of that makes a lot of sense. But my question is more like of the video, like what is the adage that the gallery brings to that presentation in this context?
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to work that out. I think that was complicated by the fact that the gallery isn't going to be experienced in person. Yeah. and that takes out, I know for Sarah's work as well, sound is really important, and for Ciarán's work, and it's in the context of a music video, losing the kind of the element that kind of brings together the rhythm of the images and the video. So that's hard to navigate. I think it'd be a different equation in the context of, say, how we were originally going to be able to present our MFA work in smaller spaces, in isolated, self-contained exhibition space, as opposed to a group format. So I think, the work is kind of reformatted in that way, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. I mean, I guess And of course, you know, it's not meant to be a criticism. I mean, that's not what I'm here to do anyway. But it's like, I guess where I'm from is, like I tried to say at the beginning, my opening gambit or whatever, I think exhibitions are a particular kind of thing. They're a particular kind of performance of staff. You know, they're not just like a hold all for, you know, an artist's latest project. Not that I'm suggesting this is, but I think these kind of considerations about like what is particular about an exhibition and what is particular about like an online circulation, like that kind of question is like really like prescient right now. I mean, it's the most important question that I think gallery institutions and curators are asking. Like, what is it we're trying to do, and like, and what is it exactly that we can't do while restrictions are in place, for instance. So I think these are really rich kind of lines of inquiry.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks
very much.
Thanks.
Andrej.
Hey guys. Sorry, I had to run downstairs. I had delivery. and that's what kind of wanted to comment as well. What Matt you have said earlier. Sorry. About how everything is changed. You know, like about our experience, how we set up exhibition and everything. You know, like I think it's changes rapidly. And a lot of things kind of moving online and everything. And in my own practice, I'm working in the more traditional way in painting oil and canvas. And I think like as an artist, we're facing more responsibility how to deliver your painting through the screen to the audience. It's you know, like if you think in some way, if you'll take, let's say, digital painting and traditional painting. Digital painting, what you can see online, it wins all the time. So I think we're kind of facing new challenges. But it's kind of, in some way, it's a good because it's almost like a time traveler in one way. Because online exhibition, if it's done in a particular way, it's not only images where you can have that experience of almost feel the brush marks and stuff like that. People on the other side of the world can see in the same time as you are, you know, like, so it's kind of like interesting time we're living. And in the case of NCAD gallery, you know, like, let's say people moving around, and people were always kind of peeping in to see what is going on in the gallery. But it's not necessary that they would walk in and actually have that experience. And at this moment, we all those peeping toms who walks by, but can walk in, you know, like, and even, you know, like we have that big glass, big window, what you can see through, but then you can't have the same experience by walking in. So I think we kind of have those obstacles, what we kind of need to think how we're going to deliver in future, you know, like, I think the online exhibition will be continue because, you know, like it will be really, we shouldn't lose that experience. We shouldn't, you know, like, the only difference what we would need to do in the future, we probably would need to apply and think how we can improve that. So people would have that really good experience, you know?
I mean, I think it's, for me, it's, I'm not quite sure where the change is going to come from, because I think the online exhibition really has been driven by galleries and institutions that don't know, that are trying to move an obstacle or work around that obstacle of not being able to deliver to the public that ultimately fund them. And that's kind of creating these projects and, you know, online exhibitions, which unfortunately in most cases tend to be delivered through the same channels as like social media promotions or advertising. Like, there's a promise out there that an online exhibition is like, an exhibition that is of a fundamental different kind, that could actually be, that could create new and accessible encounters with art in a way that is not possible either through social media, for instance, nor even possible in a kind of like walk-in traditional gallery kind of context. We just haven't like seen that kind of development yet, but I think it's going to come, and I think it's going to come quickly. So although personally I'm quite cynical about what I see happening in terms of online exhibitions, I do think there's a sort of, there's a future there, and I think artists are going to be an important part of actually shaping that, and, you know, like making a demand that the online space is more accommodating for their practices, rather than as it is at the moment, which is just like artists trying to compress their work through this very, very narrow rectangle we all have to speak to each other through, you know?
Yeah.
It's a very, as you say, and I don't mean to interrupt your flow, but I think it's just a very interesting and complicated time.
Absolutely. So I will move on to my painting. If Anne can share a screen, because in that exhibition I have only one painting.
I think you can just share your screen, Andrej.
Okay, I will try. Is it working?
Yeah.
It is, yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. So, yeah, I have only one painting in this exhibition, which is kind of a bit sad, because the whole idea behind was to kind of say, to have a narrative, you know, like, and when you will have a couple of paintings in one space, I was hoping to achieve that. So in my own head, I'm kind of dividing my practice in three categories, basically. It's before COVID, during COVID, and after the first lockdown, when I was able to find a gallery for my space and for myself, and I actually was able to start to work again on paintings. Even during the first lockdown, I managed to continue paint. The only one space in my apartment was bathroom, but I still kind of managing to do that. I was working on smaller scales and everything, but I still kind of capture that momentum going. And this painting is calling Procrastinated Future. It's the first painting after the first lockdown was ended. And when we've been told that, you know, like, we will have only a group show and not solo show, I kind of start to think, how can I put everything in one painting? So that's combination of bits and bobs of everything what I research in my project. And those two ghostly figures what I have in front, it's actually only two figures in all paintings what exist. And I think that experience when, during the first lockdown, when I was walking my dog, it was only like few people, that kind of ghost experience, I think I kind of implicated that as well in the painting. So the whole research, it's I called hiding in plain sight like SITE, like a building site. It's based on the empty apartment block, what basically it's next door to me, which is sitting empty for the last 5-6 years, probably even more. It's next to the hospital, and the irony in situation is we are in the housing crisis before the COVID kicked in, and now even more, like, it's more people who are struggling to keep their property. The nurses who, it was some situations where the nurses were looking to places to stay because they didn't want it to go back to their family because they was afraid that they will pass the COVID to them and everything. So I was trying to kind of capture the political negligent what's happening at the moment in Ireland with all the housing crisis and some landlords who are keeping their empty properties. It was only recently been mentioned that one American landlord, they own good numbers of apartments next to the Phoenix Park, and they're managing to keep the rent so high and everything. And on at the same time, you know, like we have people who, we have kids and elderly people who is eating on the streets, you know, like who is sleeping on the streets and dying every day because of the failure of our society in some way, you know, like, and we all part of it. So as Brian McGuire once said, you know, if you have something to say, say it. And I was just trying to find my voice through traditional medium to show it, basically, you know, like it in some way would be, as I said, would be kind of easier to talk about few paintings, but I think it's no point. So yeah, and you know, like in that building is still sitting empty, and it's kind of in some way became that monumental statue, what is sitting there, and so many people just passing by, and you wouldn't even notice that it's empty. You wouldn't know if you, you know, just walking by, you know, like, and even the name of the painting, Procrastinated Future. Procrastinated, this means, you know, like you leaving something off for the future, and the future is part of the name already. So I'm kind of like trying to, with sarcasm, to give the name to the painting and the name to the whole project as well.
And can I just ask a general question? I mean,
yeah.
I think painters get a kind of quite a hard time because they're often asked, especially painters that try and deal with like political themes or social issues, because the criticism would be that, and it's a criticism that should rightly extend across other disciplines, of course, but the criticism is that, you know, it's just you know, it's just a painting. It's designed to hang on a wall, and it's kind of inert, you know, like there's no activism that it produces. I mean, how do you, as a painter, like navigate that? Like, is it something you think about like formally in the way that you construct your paintings, or is the politics just something that is just part of the energy that of approach? Do you understand what I'm?
Yes, I am. I think it's actually, it's combination of both. It's kind of eclectic way of thinking and working at the same time, rather than to be only politic involved or be on the other side. And you see, that's the problem as well. I'm not giving the answer what to do, because during research I found a lot of positive and negative why it can be resolved so easily, you know, like, but through the medium I'm trying to capture that. And I know what you're saying, it's actually harder to do through the paintings, you know, like it's such a traditional way of working, and a lot of new way of working. It actually stands on the old school paintings and sculptures, you know, like, and
but do you feel, yeah, I mean, like you could say, well, if you want to represent or show those social issues, you could simply just take a photograph and produce those photographs as big as you possibly can afford to do and plaster them everywhere. But, you know, painting is what you choose to do. But as you are kind of constructing those paintings and you are applying it with color, and you are working on it, like, how does it, are you interested in making those, like, is there an ambiguity in the way that you construct your paintings that tries to be a kind of vehicle or a way of massaging the kind of issues you want to address? I mean, do you feel some responsibility to find a new format for painting or to work in other disciplines that better addresses the kinds of issues that you're concerned with?
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
question, but by the way.
Absolutely. Like, you know, like you're the way you started to talk, first of all, it's personal preference to work in painting. And I feel I have a more control when I'm working in that way. You know, like, because as, let's say, if you're working through photos, yes, you're right, you know, like it's actually easier would be to say, to take photo or work through the words, let's say, you know, because they're easier to express what you wanted to say, and it's easier to deliver to people, because end of the day, painting, it's something can be interpreted in different way. And as a painter, I have only half, basically not even half, I have only 25% of how it's going to be shown and how it's going to be observed by the audience.
Yeah.
Because another 25% or 27% will be given to the curator, and around 47% will be given to the audience. So sometimes, not sometimes, in usual, it's harder unless it's really, what I want to say, sorry, I'm kind of lost my train of thoughts.
I mean, I would just
if it's something, sorry, Matt, if it's something literal, what it's really easy to understand that what you're trying to say, otherwise it can be interpreted in different way, you know, like, so, I went wrong direction, isn't it?
No, it's interesting what you're saying. And I was kind of amazed that you're able to break down your percentages of like intent in a way, you know.
I just read recently, somebody did that percentage of how people are viewing the any type of art, and
yeah,
I found that really interesting. So that's why I'm only using that.
I would say it's not, for me, it's not about easier or more difficult. And you use, I mean, just to sort of play, you know, I'm just trying to be devil's advocate here. You know, I mean, taking photographs is also a difficult, I mean, I don't think that's the kind of correct spectrum to be thinking this through. But like, taking photographs is a much more directly representational way of connecting an issue to an image, right? And painting is your personal preference. And even as a painter, there's ambiguity there between it being in terms of a spectrum of like representational painting and like formal abstraction. You are somewhere in the middle of that. So I guess that's why I'm talking about ambiguity. Like, you know, that ambiguity of representation and the way that you choose to represent these issues, like, to what extent is that an ambiguity of relationship to the social issues that you've spoken about? I mean, I'm not sure there's a question there, actually. It's more just a kind of an observation. Andrej, I enjoyed the chat on that.
Thanks, Matt.
Oh, hi, Matt, and hi, everyone.
Hi, Lena.
So I thought I'll just start with talk a bit about my work then, and I'll share an image. But it's actually several images. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have two works in the exhibition, and they both center around a quote by John Muir, who is considered the father of North American national parks. And the quote is, "I only went out for a walk, but decided to stay until sundown, for going out was in fact going in." And I work very intuitively, and I find inspiration by spending time in nature. And I find there's a strong spiritual core that you sense in nature, which I'm trying to somehow translate or communicate through my work by exploring different medias through color and shape and reflections and light. And I consider myself primarily as a painter, but I do work with all kinds of materials that I'm drawn to. And I'm trying to, my work is not conceptual in a sense, it's more about, well, it's all about emotions and feelings, and both capturing my own feelings from what I experience, but also I'm hoping that the audience would spend time with my work and that it will be some kind of transformative experience, and even with, you know, healing elements. And from that aspect, the shape of the works, I usually work in the square format. And the square is very significant in that sense because it's the most important shape in sacred geometry. It's the shape from which all other shapes emanate. And in theosophical teachings, they say that they talk about the perfect square, and that everything in the universe is contained within that perfect square. Both works are a variation of the same composition. And the composition is an intuitive amalgamation of memories, of colors and shape from a specific area in my near my hometown in Sweden. So there's this specific forest area that I visited and spent quite a lot of time in. And when I started with the painting, and when I made it, I chose the colors intuitively. I was very drawn to pink and green. And it didn't really make sense to me when the painting was done that it was from a specific, you know, dark forest. But then I looked at photographs that I had taken from that area, and I could find the shapes as shadows, and I could find the colors, but they weren't obvious, but they had somehow gathered in my subconscious, and they came out as that painting. And then I wanted to explore that composition in different materials and in different sizes to kind of challenge how you view or how you feel, because my work is all about emotions and how the viewer perceive and feel about the work. And with texture and size and color and transparency, you can kind of affect all that. And I thought that was interesting to explore. And there's actually another piece that I made with the same composition, a small embroidery, but it is not in this exhibition.
It seems to me like quite a leap between working on canvas and then working with colors on a window. I mean, they're completely different things in many ways.
Yeah, it is.
You know, from a viewer perspective, and of course as a maker, I'm sure. I mean, you say that there's a compositional relationship, but but I mean, could you just talk a little bit about that difference then? I mean,
yeah, because what happened was,
how did you do?
Yeah, because what happened was that before COVID and the lockdown, I was working on very large scale with mainly painting, but I did explore other materials as well. But then during lockdown, I was confined to a small space, and I had to rethink everything I did, and I started to experiment with colored filters. You just had to work with whatever you could find in your environment.
Mm.
And I had these, what do you call them? Like sweet wrappers, like the transparent sweet wrappers. And I started using them. And I took photographs, and I played with the reflections, and I used them as filters when I took photographs. And the photograph and the squares, and I was looking at Joseph Albers' stained glass pieces. It all kind of turned into, you know, how you make something smaller, and it made me think of pixelations, and I pixelated the painting quite heavily, and it just kind of evolved into different materials. And
sorry, when you say you pixelated the painting heavily, what do you mean?
oh yeah, sorry. So I used the image of the painting,
Okay.
and then I used a program I found online to pixelate it into 64 squares.
Okay.
And yeah, the pixels and the thought of stained glass and stained glass windows, and it just kind of evolved. And I'm not very good at explaining it, but it kind of was a long but kind of natural process. I was just experimenting with materials, and there wasn't really I suppose a straight line between them that I can.
Yeah.
That I can.
But, I mean, it must as an artist, and you describe yourself as being predominantly a painter. I think I heard you say that. I mean, it must. Does working on window glass give you the same? Does it feel sufficient to you? I mean, do you feel like the same artist in this process?
Well, the window glass is more about what it does than what it is, and it creates a lot of reflections. Mm-hmm. And to create reflections, either it's with moving image or moving light, or it's like painting, but you're painting with the light instead of the paints, if that makes sense. So in that sense, it's still a painting. Unfortunately, people can't visit and experience those reflections. But I snuck in there the other day and took some photographs. You can see some of the reflections.
I think it's worth being sensitive to its effects. Also, in another sense, I mean, I haven't seen it, and I'm seeing these images for the first time. But any coloured window treatment is, of course, quite ambiguous in terms of who it's for or who it addresses. With a painting, it's quite straightforward. As a viewer, you know exactly kind of where to stand in front of it. And, you know, it comes like a painting typically comes with manners in terms of how you're meant to read it, approach it, where you're supposed to stand, how much time you're supposed to spend with it, you know. Whereas something like a stained glass or colored window treatment is a much more ambiguous proposition. You know, is it for looking at? Is it decorative? Is it a supplement to the building? Is it designed to cast light on the objects and the environment on either side of those windows, which are of course two different environments. For me, there's a very sort of productive and very interesting set of things to think about in relation to this glass work. As markedly different from a kind of a more straightforward painting practice.
Yeah, because the work evolved in the sense as well that it became also about the pandemic in terms of the colors. Because the colors are the pink, green and orange. Orange is a color of transformation and change, and green and pink have philosophical attributes like resilience and adaptability. And green and pink are also considered in holistic approaches and color theory that they are healing colors of the heart and lungs, which is the area that is affected by COVID. So in that respect, if you look at the work as contemplative and reflective, and if you spend time with those colors, would we receive some kind of healing or ease from spending time with those colors? And also with the transparency of the window, when you look through the window and you look through different colors, everything changes. Mm-hmm. And it looks different, and even the grain is different, even though it's the same material, it's all acetate. Yeah. But there seems to be a different texture in each of the colors, so they look differently when you look through them. And in a way, I suppose this pandemic has changed how we look at things and how we perceive things. And so in a way, the world has changed its colors. And I kind of had that in mind as well when I did the window.
Yeah.
Which wasn't actually a window to start with. It was a free hanging piece of 64 individual squares. But with the architecture of the building and the piece kind of had the thought of, reminiscing a stained glass window, it worked perfectly to transfer it onto the actual window. It lost a little bit of the squareness, unfortunately, but
yeah, I think it works very well. Lena, I'm aware that we're out of time, but one of the things I'll just quickly say though is that, I was aware when you were presenting, there's an awful lot of very personal language that you bring to the description of the work, and of course, it's not for me to say that that it should be done or should be presented any differently. But I think one of the challenges of a very kind of personal, internal syntax in relation to the work that you produce is the question of how you make that communicable. How do you make that public? Mm. And
that is a challenge.
Yeah, no, and I think it's an interesting challenge, and it's one that I think needs to be kind of embraced. And I think that's why I'm sort of so encouraged to see the glass work, because I think that is doing something different. It's somehow more in the world. It's like literally more transparent in its kind of language or in its approach, and it's clearer in terms of what it's designed to do. I'm being very literal about this, but I think I think it's what I'm seeing in this kind of shift is very important, I think, and I really appreciate you talking about it.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Matt.
Thanks, Lena.
Thank you.
Hello, Matt. Hello, class.
Hello.
Now, I suppose that's the end product. The end product, in a way. COVID has actually stopped all that. I started when I went to NCAD 5 years ago, being interested in climate change, because as a fairly passionate gardener, I was very aware of how plants were actually changing. So I got interested in the notion and read a great deal about it, of how climate is interfering and with our health, and obviously the virus is a perfect example of that. So I came across plants, and I just chose the very simple one of the sunflower and Brussels sprouts, to which I think we are all very familiar with. These have an extraordinary ability to actually absorb the toxins from the earth, obviously from the immediate areas where these plants are growing. And it is it's a very cheap way, in a way of, I'm not explaining this very much now. It's an anti-pollution measure that actually benefits the entire earth and is much less costly than the chemicals. So my 3 artists, I think, were McGuinne, Viet Ngo, and Lorna Jordan, all lived and reared in America. Now, there are 2 plants that I picked, which are very easy to grow in Ireland. As I say, they are the Brussels sprouts and sunflower seeds. Now, I was I grew these as an experiment, and following McGuinne and Viet Ngo in particular, I was able to get arranged for a hospital to x-ray them, because that way you can see inside the plant of what actually is going on. And if the toxins have been sucked up through the plant and thereby are clearing the air. The X-ray artist, or radiological artist as he's called, is called Nick Vesey, and I followed a lot of his stuff. He started by, his girlfriend was working for Coca-Cola and he was a photographer, and he just, she asked him, would he get an X-ray of Coca-Cola tin, and it started from there completely. He became a very well-known radiological artist. So I did the experimental part of it, looking at the plants. It hasn't been done very often. So, and as I say, I was lucky to get access to, I was lucky enough to get access to 2 hospitals in particular and take X-rays. I suppose on a larger scale, the work, I think, my work has a message to convey, that there is a way that is quite less costly, and will help the pollution, the Earth's. And having the bottom half of the picture are the insides of Brussels sprouts. The 3/4 of it is image of the X-ray images, obviously, of the sunflower seeds. And I got those photos.
Sorry, Valerie. So they're composed together then, the images?
Well, the end result, yeah.
Okay.
They were obviously grown separately.
Of course.
Yeah, and then I X-rayed them all separately and then got them photoshopped and enlarged. I wanted the image because at the end of the day, if we don't do something about pollution, well, we are going to have a desolate Earth. I mean, I won't have to go into it. Everybody knows that, I'm sure. So I thought if I try and join the dots, so to speak, we might have a gloomy, maybe haunting, startling image of what the Earth will end up like. And that's, I think, about it. If you can ask me any questions, please do.
Yeah, could you just some very simple questions. Does the scale of the prints look very big? Is that my imagination?
No, they are big. They were 9 feet, I think, 9 yards. They're large. They're much taller than you or me. So, and I think Anne hung them. Can I say Anne hung them beautifully? They're exactly as I would have liked them to be hung. I mean, I wanted it ghostly and nobody around, you know.
So could you talk about that then, the scale of them? What sort of decision was it to make them of that scale?
Well, my decision was that this is a macro problem. It's just micro, it's not micro. It's not me growing a single little plant. So I thought about it for a great while, and then I thought, well, look, I will do the biggest I can. So it is really to convey the largeness of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it worked quite well.
And a similar question, what sort of decision was it in the way that you composed and photoshopped the two X-rays? What sort of decisions did you find yourself making when you were doing that digital composition?
Well, I thought I would kind of turn it into a deserted forest. So that's what I tried to do. I'm not at all good at even Photoshop. So I thought it came out quite well, really.
Oh, I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I think they look beautiful. In fact, I guess I'm just interested in, yeah, the sort of decisions that you as an artist, like any artist, makes in, you know, moving the elements of the work around, and whether those decisions were led by more formal concerns, and by that I mean more in terms of the shapes or strength of image, or was it more of, was it a set of decisions that was led by more the issue that you wanted to communicate?
Yeah, well, I think a bit like Lena, I work on intuition a lot, but you know, I just the notion of a totally deserted forest, which in the end I chose, like deserted earth, deserted deserts, and because of the shape of the plants, I suppose I was guided by, okay, that could look like a forest, like it is the end of the earth. In my mind, if we continue the way we are, So it was a little bit intuition and a little bit of, I think the best image I thought of to convey the desolation is a deserted forest. I think I had called it the haunted forest. I'm not sure. So yeah, at the end I decided on a dead forest.
I mean, for me, it's quite interesting because although I can't see the images in close detail, I think they look incredibly beautiful, beautiful objects and very beautiful images. And I suppose I'm wrestling with myself as to whether that's a contradiction or of your intent to also image a harrowing world and a world of like total desolation and destruction. I mean, do those two things feel like a contradiction to you, or?
No, I was pleased with them. Now, whether I have enough whatever to say that is a thing of beauty, to me it was, but it wasn't actually as important as having it. I mean, if you saw it in real life, so to speak, it's quite creepy and haunting. And that's really what I wanted to convey.
Yeah. And in terms of the toxins that existed within the plants, I mean, did you get them kind of reviewed, or?
Well, there's a standard toxins. I got in touch, got a lot of help from the in UCD, from laboratory there, and Matt Harney was a botanist, and a scientist called Caroline Elliott Kingston. And I was given those toxins because they decided that they were the common known toxins that are straight from the environment, you know, straight from pollution. And so they were given to me, if you like, as a package. I mean, it was extremely cooperative, and a lot of people were interested. And as I say, I think it seemed to be a common enough package. There are about 4 or 5 bottles that I got that I think students had been using them as well as interference to plant life, ordinary plant life. But the remediation plants, which are Brussels sprouts, and sunflower seed, they have the most magic ability to absorb toxins, which actually cleans up the earth. I mean, to me, it is pure art, pure magic. So that's why I was also interested in trying to see what's going on inside. I mean, I think the COVID in particular has taught us to look inside ourselves a bit. And one of the topics which has come up a lot, as I'm sure you know, is this sudden regard for nature. I mean, people are now appreciating in the nature that I know they didn't, you know, several years ago. So, I mean, in the critical analysis that I have read, there always has been this notion of disconnect, and technology is often blamed for it, but this disconnect between man and nature. So I think lots of interesting things happened. So I'm certainly grateful to all those that helped me for that. Now I have a problem, of course, if I want to do any of it again, because I will never during this COVID time ever be able to get into a hospital. I don't know, will they all be very cautious? Maybe they will, in which case I just have to look around the corner somewhere else.
I think Andrej has a question or wants to come in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just find really fascinating what you're talking about.
Thank you.
We basically have a solution on our doorstep. The
Yeah.
question is, how many sprouts do we need to grow, and how many people need to grow sprouts so we will help the whole environment in, let's say, just Dublin?
Well, I suppose my answer is this, that if we had a lot of money, you and me, you would help me ring up. There's a wonderful Vietnamese American. He has now started to work on corporate pollution, so that he has masses and masses and masses, great big tanks, and he uses another remediation plant, which is a pondweed. Again, very common in Ireland. And I think you would have to be realistic, deploy such extraordinary expertise and just get them to do these things. I mean, I see the whole, I walk around Belfield, I used to, a lot, and there's huge orchards, for instance, that are pure experimental. You know, there's a lot of earth that is grown purely experimental in various plants and God knows what. So political will, of course, it could be done, but political will at the moment is certainly not there.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in here, but Matt, can you make your finishing comments with Valerie? I'm sorry about it, but we just need to move on.
Thanks so much, Valerie. I really enjoyed looking at the work and hearing you talk about it. I feel that, I mean, I really appreciate the politics that you're bringing to the work, but I also think that there's a wonderful, lovely, and if, dare I say, like eccentricity to these images which are grown from Brussels sprouts. You've got like this haunted forest of Brussels sprouts and sunflowers. It's quite unusual, and I think you should embrace that and move it forward. You know, bring the politics with you, of course, but even in terms of messing around with, you know, Photoshop and making all of these hybrid compositions, it's very interesting to see, and I really like it. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Good. I will certainly try that.
Thanks, Rhoda.
When COVID is over. Yeah.
Niamh.
Okay. How you doing?
Hi, Niamh.
Hey. I'll get a move on here. Let's see, where am I? Let's stop. Now. So, this is, can everybody see that? Anybody see? Yeah, great. Super.
Yeah.
Deadly, thanks. This is what I envisaged my work was going to look like at the end of the year. This is a Photoshop of my little annex room. It's been kind of, it's been, what will I say? I've Photoshopped it so it's bigger, so I can give you an idea. So I'm about to give myself the job and I haven't to stop this going through a slideshow. Let's see, just slides. So this is my work. I call it the an imaginable remedy for an intangible malady, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it kind of sprung from something I was really interested in a couple of years ago, which was how the body holds trauma and how it tries to hide it, but eventually it makes its own way out regardless. So it was I suppose to some extent, a little bit about, I suppose, your own control over your body, all these kind of ideas. But as I say, this is what I imagined it was going to be, and that all kind of came to a pretty quick halt back in March when they were left in the annex and we were all at home. So I kind of changed my tune and went to do a little film. So this was, I'm actually thinking, when you said at the start to think about your presentational decisions, this was what I was kind of encouraged myself to do, was to kind of to make a little film. So it was like a little 3-minute film. It's still a project in progress, but I am enjoying it, and it kind of threaded together an awful lot of the research I'd been doing throughout the 2 years. So in some ways, it was a really nice end to the year, which was an unexpected and unplanned end. So this is what it looks like at the minute. And I was really loving Lena talking about the healing and spending time with the colors, because these 3 boxes are intending to be kind of healing spaces. And showing them beside Lena with the lovely light coming in on them, it just made me appreciate how this kind of gave it a more poetic dimension that I hadn't anticipated. So it was a really nice surprise. And I think the reflections on them really added to it in a way that I hadn't planned. So my dilemma, I guess, was at the end of the year when we were thinking about, or at the end of the academic year, and we had to kind of change our tack, and I decided to do a film. When we had the mention of this show came up, I was really thrilled, because I thought, you know, I'll get to show these boxes. They won't be a figment of my Photoshop nightmares. So I was really keen that I included these instead of the film. So that's I guess what prompted me to make sure and put these forward rather than the film. But I still had the same, well, at the start, we were all under the idea that this would be a physical show that you would be able to come in and visit. And one of the big issues that I'd had from the start was how you would encourage somebody to get into them, because they were all designed to be gotten into. I mean, this, if you can see I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there are 3 of them. Can you?
Yeah. Yeah,
good. That one is called Press Pause, and it's kind of designed like a Faraday cage. So it's meant to block electromagnetic signals. It was influenced by this mad machine made by this guy called Willem Reich, called an orgone accumulator. And that was supposed to transfer biological energy and pass it on to a body that sat inside it. This one over here I called Press Pause, and that actually I used that technique of covering the shell of it with layers of alternating layers of absorber and energy conductors. So that works as an orgone accumulator. And in it I put a little swing. I might just shuffle down to this slide, because that shows the inside of it. And the idea being that you'd sit in the swing and you'd be swaying, there'd be a nice movement, and you'd hit off the sides and you get your little air energy fix. And then the one that's taking up the space in the front, that was Shed Skin. And initially I had envisaged that big cow brush would rotate on a sensor. So when you got in, you'd basically have some kind of sensory experience that was to make up for not being able to, or maybe have been feeling disconnected. And this is just a nice shot of the inside. I didn't want to leave out. And this is the inside of Press Pause. So they're really the kind of the images I have to share with you. One of the ways I got around encouraging people to get in was to try and make a little booklet. So I made this like kind of pseudo-scientific instructional user's manual, which just outlines the theory behind it. It's downloadable on the website, thanks to Anne. And it gives you an idea of what you might expect. And I suppose some of the background, the research behind it.
The structures, could you just talk about them in a sculptural sense? Like, are they found objects that you've modified, or are they?
The first one, this one in the middle, I know I'm not going left to right, but the one in the middle was one I had fabricated out of steel. And I had initially intended to cover that in layers of wool and wood, and I just liked the look of it so much I couldn't bear to do that. So instead I found, this was a found object down in the basement of the annex. It's an old data cabinet, a server cabinet, and it was perfect dimensionally, and I was quite happy to hack away at that and to, you know, strip off the paint layers and add on what I wanted to add to it. I suppose on a sculptural sense, that one I enjoyed. I did some, I texturized the inside. So if to kind of give this idea of curtains and being on show, it's got a privacy film on it. So when you're sitting in it, nobody can see you, but you can see out. And that was kind of interesting. It wasn't a natural decision, because initially it was weirder for the person looking in than it was for the person sitting in it. So the kind of the balance of, I suppose, who felt out of place. It was definitely the person looking in, but I still went ahead and put the privacy film on it. Just, I thought it added something more contained. I like the idea of these being little spaces that you could be contained in. So
I love this kind of work. I love, you know, I'm a big like Edward Kienholz fan and Mike Nelson, these kinds of environments that contain or that kind of stage these kinds of dramas, like psychological or otherwise. So this kind of work is really up my street.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
But I will say, and it looks great, but what I will say something that I hope does not sound too critical. I'm going to try and spin this in a positive way if I can. But I feel like the environments look quite brutal.
Yes.
They look like environments that are uncomfortable spaces for people to be. And the reason why I don't think that's a criticism is that I think the proposition or the invitation for people to attend and sit on that swing or get inside that steel box or whatever is itself quite interesting. Like what your demand is.
Well, that's it exactly. You've hit the nail there, because it was the whole idea, I suppose, that, you know, sometimes it's you know, difficult medicine that you have to take, that this is something that you might not want to do, but ultimately you might get some reward out of it. I mean, you know, I suppose that was something that came up often in tutorials and crits was, you know, would you not make them a little bit more hospitable looking? And I think about it and I go, actually, no, I really like the idea that you have to make a decision to give it a try. And that I
think I would hedge my bets even further, which is that I don't think the work should start and stop or win or fail on the basis of someone participating with it.
No.
I don't think that's even really the stakes of what you're proposing. I think as propositions of participation, they are themselves, they transmit quite a lot of energy and ambiguity, and I think that's a good thing.
Oh, that's great.
In typical process, I mean, because I am interested in them, I'm perhaps going to say more critical stuff about them. So that's just the sort of the nature of the process, I suppose. But I do wonder whether, like, you know, Wilhelm Reich and the organ, I mean, that's quite well known as a, and I wonder if that's quite well known as a therapy process, whether the work is too moored, or perhaps whether in future it could be less moored or less anchored by specific like treatment or a specific therapy, and they might be more, like, I'm using the word ambiguous a lot today, but they might be more ambiguous in terms of what they're proposing.
They are loosely, I suppose it's something that I started with. I don't think any of them really have a proven effect that you can say, yes, that's a definite boost your well-being, but that to me wasn't that important, oddly, even though I've kind of stressed all that in talking about them. I think it was more that there was something quite quirky about them, that it was there's like a performance, or, you know, that going into them, you're making a decision. It's like a ritual that it's up to yourself really what you do or how you feel or what you get out of it. And I kind of really resisted for ages saying, this would do this, and you would feel this, and I want, and this whole idea of mediating an audience experience, I was less interested, more interested that people would actually just try them and see themselves.
Yeah, well, in that case, maybe it's not a set of sculptural considerations in that sense. It's maybe more in the space of like how the works might be titled, or how you would present the works in a context like this, or in any exhibition mediation. Yeah. But I think for me, I would enjoy the ambiguity more so, you know, without knowing the Wilhelm Reich reference, or that for me already sets up a map of historical references. I know what to expect, and I know the kind of philosophy of that of those processes, and I think I would enjoy not knowing that and be left to kind of figure that out in a way with the material that's in front of me.
Interesting. No, I appreciate that actually, because I suppose the third one that I had kind of covered in film and a net, it looks pretty impressive without the film on it, but I really wanted you to be inside something, and that's why I proceeded with that. So it's more about just being in a little space than anything else, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
That's great, Niamh. Congratulations.
Thank you, Neil.
Hey, folks. Hi, Matt. Hi, everybody.
Hi,
great. I really enjoyed the afternoon. A lot of really good stuff there. So thanks to everybody on the panel. I'll just go straight into this. So can we see that image?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I think in very many ways, my concerns with this piece of work that I showed in the gallery, or showing in the gallery, presenting in the gallery, do tie in with your initial questions as to accessibility, dissemination, all those types of things. So I'm just starting with 3 clips from the piece that I presented for the graduate show. So since the graduate show that never happened, in that it went online. And my original proposal was to do a live performance in a relatively large space on campus. And the piece was based around movement, a lot of movement with spoken word content. And the idea was that the character was in some sort of possibly a liminal space, a space that's never really defined. And he himself talks a lot about love and the consequences the loss of that love has when you're left behind. So because the show was effectively shelved, I was still anxious to present the work after 2 years. So I decided to do to stream it online through Instagram. And it was enjoyable, quite satisfactory. But because of the limitations of the screen and the limitations of the space that I borrowed to do the performance in, I had to really cut back all the movement. There's just little hints of movement every now and again. So when the opportunity came up for the current show, the January show, I was quite excited by it. And I was thinking, likelihood is that we probably will go into a lockdown again. So how will I go about it? So I proposed doing, I had made a recording of this piece, a sound recording. I had adapted it, worked with two musicians, just kind of looking at the same themes. And that's what I originally submitted for this current show. But then when the complete lockdown kicked in, I was thinking that's just pointless because nobody can get into the space. The words will just be going into a void. I want an audience. So I thought what I would do is I would just present the original piece, which is the triptych image that you saw there, without any of the words. So the original piece, I had in my head kind of a playlist of all these significant songs over the last 50 years, 60 years that had an influence or that kind of triggered moments in my head. And that had been one of the starting points of the research for the spoken word monologue with movement. So I decided, okay, I'll pitch this piece to Anne, and Anne went, great. And so I removed all the words, and I have a playlist in my head that plays random. And effectively at this stage, I'm almost supercharged into each of them. So I just react accordingly when the piece comes up. So it's 30 minutes of me dancing and moving in the space. The ultimate satisfaction is that it is a public piece. And I've always been driven by the idea that live art needs to be live. I'm not great on recording stuff or documenting stuff or transferring it into some other medium. I just think it is live. It's there, it's gone, you catch it. And with this piece, I'm really excited in that it's probably the nearest for me to what live art is about, that it's this transitory thing, that it's there and it's gone. But I love that the people here pass by the window, are taken by surprise, and they can engage with it for a few minutes. There's nothing that they need to know because there's no context other than this figure dancing in this big gallery space. To be honest with you, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Sorry, just for reference. So
Yeah.
are you listening to music then while you're dancing?
Am I?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's visible. That's not hidden. That's clearly.
Yeah, it's on. There's a headphones, and then the wire just hangs to the back of the pocket. It is tucked in under the shirt because my arms move a lot, so it doesn't get caught up in the wires. But yeah, I think it is visible. I hope it's visible that there is the headphones and the lead at the back. Okay, what it all boils down to is this idea of, and I constantly reference it in my work, is this thing that you go into the kitchen at night, you turn off the lights, you turn on your record player or whatever, and you dance with abandon. Nobody can see you. Nobody need ever know.
Yeah.
So that kind of is the roots of it. And that in itself is an escape, it's time out, and it's extreme. It's a really simple resolution. But then I think as a result, then it possibly does bounce around a lot more. I mean, one thing I had been very reluctant to engage with during the first lockdown was the notion that the piece addressed COVID. I didn't really want to go there. Whereas actually now with this piece, I think it really does address the idea of isolation, the fact that we can't do that anymore. We do not have permission to dance in public spaces. And I quite like the idea, well, actually, hey, look at me, I'm doing it. It's great. So.
But I think it's slightly more or less than that also, in that it's not quite clear whether you're even addressing people, whether this is for anybody. And I think that's as a spectator, even as a remote spectator, and as I'm sure it's the same for anyone that's walking past NCAD, you're not quite sure if this performance is for you to win. You're not sure if you're trespassing on someone's own emotional landscape here, And I think that itself is very precious and delicate, like a beautiful and tender moment in what has been quite a difficult, time for many, many people. So
yeah, hopefully, great. That's great. Thanks for that. I'm glad that's what it's seen, and I hope that how people who are standing outside in the cold or the dark feel that. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that your practice is just going to you're going to try and roll that out over the next 30?
I don't know. I mean, the thing that was interesting after the MA finished, I just actually there is nothing I can do because there is no live audience. So in fact, from June to now, there was nothing. And now I suppose I'm thinking, ooh, okay, this is kind of interesting. It satisfies me and there's possibilities. So it's kind of recharging batteries, which is nice.
Yeah. It's a work that made me think of this Susan Phillips, who I'm sure you know. Susan Phillips did a work. I mean, she's done lots of works where there's a solitary voice playing in a particular site. But I'm thinking of an exhibition that she did in Malmo. This was about 10, 15 years ago, and it was just her voice in an empty gallery speaking words of David Bowie song, and there was just an incredible poignancy, a yearning that is written into those words and in her slow utterance of those words, and that I feel that that's a work that I'd recommend sort of having a look at. And
yeah, great, absolutely.
I mean, not just for the work itself, but I think for practices like this that are quite, let's say, like minimal, or that require a certain like architecture around them, because what is being delivered is so slight in a sense. It's also worth looking at the way that they, as an institution, kind of managed that, the way that they staged that work in what was an otherwise completely empty hall, the way that they communicated it. All of these things become very, very important in practices that really rely on that kind of dissonant energy. And a dissonance of kind of like invisibility, or a dissonance of sort of slightness or something. Like, I think it would be a very different work if, it's obvious it'd be a very, very different work if restrictions weren't in place.
Yes.
And that space was crowded. I'm not sure the proposition would work. I'm not sure that the ethos of the work would carry. So it's worth being. I'm basically saying, like, congratulations. I think it's a really good work, but I also think it's worth being like tuned to all of the things that make that work.
Yeah.
Some of them to do with the performance, of course, but some of them are also to do with the exhibition space, the lack of others, the way that it's staged and set up. Everything is kind of an important, is an important staging of that work. So it's why it made me think of Susan Phillips in the way that she does it with her order.
Yeah. It's funny because even obviously there wasn't any attempt at planning behind it, but the thing that I find quite interesting is that when I'm there, I'm particularly aware of Sarah's piece before me, and there is that idea of it transforms my headspace into something else. Even just how I'm engaging with that, I find really interesting. And then I'm also aware as well of that beautiful big block of pink at the back of me, and even little things like that. I'm thinking in my head, how this is working. So again, the use of the space, absolutely. The resonances, etc. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks very much.
No problem. I'm sorry you had to wait to the end there, and thanks to everybody that has been so patient. We've gone on now for 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Good luck, Anne.
You have a hell of a job trying to edit this into a 1 hour session. Thanks to you, Anne, and thanks to all you. And as Anne said, like, congratulations on the work and on making something happen in impossible circumstances. It's not just about now and the days of the exhibition itself. I mean, this is going to be an important kind of legacy point. I'm sure for you and for others as well, hopefully. So, congratulations and all the best.
Great, thanks very much.
Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Excellent.
Bye, everybody.
See you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.